Dear professors and distinguished guests, first I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity of being part of this research group, and also for having the honor to introduce and to give an overview today about the role and activity of the Hungarian Future Generations Ombudsman. It was mentioned by Professor Szilágyi in the beginning that the Hungarian Ombudsman was given as a good example and referred to by several authors of the book as something which could be implemented in their countries as well. And we will see that it's a really special institution and unique in the world. First of all, let's say a few words about the protection of future generations in the international context. So the concept of future generations is a component of the theory of intergenerational equity that was laid down by Edith Brown Weiss, and it generally means briefly that natural resources shall be shared equally and fairly among the different generations, especially among the generations of the present and the future. And even though there are several international documents that declare the responsibility towards future generations, starting from the Stockholm Declaration and until the climate change regime documents from Kyoto to Paris, it's really hard to actually enforce their rights or their interests because of several reasons. So, for example, there is one of the strongest reasons for these difficulties is a non-existence question. How to enforce rights of people who are not born yet, or who actually belong to the group of future generations, whether it also encompasses people who are born, young people, or just the people who are yet to be born in the future. And another question is how to impose duties, because rights go hand in hand with duties in law. So how to impose duties on present generations if future generations cannot actually be right holders because they are not born yet, so it's a bit difficult. And also the standing of future generations before the courts raises interesting questions which are actually challenged now in front of different domestic courts. These are the so-called climate change litigation cases, in which the plaintiffs refer to the rights of future generations, and they started to appear and the number of them increased rapidly after the adoption of the Paris Agreement. And now there are a few pending applications before the European Court of Human Rights as well. And we are waiting for the results. But on the domestic level, we can say that they are quite successful. As for the institutional representation of future generations, there are certain endeavors which were highlighted especially in one report of the UN Secretary General from 2013. And this report proposed several ideas which until now have not been implemented yet, but this is an example, for example, the High Commissioner for Future Generations, or the establishment of a special envoy for future generations. And the report also examined different national institutions that work and advocate for future generations worldwide in different countries. And there are namely 8 of these institutions that are analyzed in the report. And it is really noticeable that one of them is the Hungarian Ombudsman. The one from New Zealand was the first one to be established, and together with the one from Canada and Wales, they are entitled as commissioners. And in Finland, it's a parliamentary committee. In Norway, it's an ombudsman for children, and in Germany, it's an advisory council. While the Israeli commissioner was abolished, it was functioning for a few years, but now we cannot say that it's functioning because it's not. And I'm going to present the Hungarian office among these examples. So a few words about the antecedents of the current institutional framework. In 2007, the so-called Green Ombudsman, the Office of the Green Ombudsman, was established, which was functioning as one of the 4 separate and independent ombudspersons. And without going into details, I just would like to mention that he had strong powers according to the law, including the power to call upon a person or organization to cease the environmentally harmful activities and to turn to court in this regard. The ombudsman system fundamentally changed with the adoption of the new constitution in 2011. I will come back to it, but first I would like to mention that the new fundamental law contains several references to future generations, which is very new in the Hungarian constitutional law because it wasn't present in the previous constitution. So the preamble refers to the responsibility of present generations towards future generations to protect the living conditions for them. And Article P is also notable, which aims at protecting natural resources, and it also states that it is an obligation of the state and everyone to protect, maintain and preserve them for future generations. Article 38 shall also be mentioned in this context because it refers to the management of national assets that shall aim at taking into account the needs of future generations. So these three provisions actually create a solid basis for the functioning of the Hungarian Green Ombudsman, and it also shows the importance of the needs of future generations, how they are taken into account in the Hungarian constitutional framework. Article 30 of the Fundamental Law introduced a new ombudsman system, and it also led to the abolishment of the previous ombudsman system. So now there is one ombudsman who is the Commissioner for Fundamental Rights, and there are two deputies, one being responsible for the protection of the interests of future generations, and the other one for the rights of national minorities living in Hungary. And there is also a separate act from the same year that regulates the Commissioner for Fundamental Rights. According to this law, without reading all of them, there are 8 powers which are specifically mentioned in this act, and I will touch upon most of them, but here I would like to focus on 2, which is the power to propose the Commissioner to turn to the Constitutional Court, and secondly, to propose the adoption or a modification of laws concerning the interests of future generations. In the context of the influence on the Constitutional Court's practice, I would like to mention 3 decisions. The first one is from 2017, which was in relation to the Natura 2000 protected areas. And there was an amicus curiae submitted by the Commissioner and the Ombudsman for Future Generations. And the court heavily relied on the argumentation of the Ombudsman. And this decision is notable for the interpretation of biodiversity under Article P of the Fundamental Law, and it's also notable for elaborating on the ecocentric approach that is prevalent in this article of the Fundamental Law. And also it interprets the triple obligation towards future generations, that is the preservation of choice, quality and access, that is present in the... Actually, it was laid down by Edith Brown-Weiss, as I have mentioned, in the theory of intergenerational equity, and it's also part of the Hungarian constitutional framework. The second decision that I would like to highlight here is from 2018, and it was related to groundwater resources, the protection of groundwater resources, which was actually initiated by the President of the Republic, and it also relied on the arguments of the Ombudsman for Future Generations. And this decision is really important also for the Hungarian constitutional framework for the protection of the environment, for raising the precautionary principle to a constitutional level. And thirdly, which is probably the most important one in this context, is the decision from 2020. And it was initiated actually by the Commissioner upon the request of the Ombudsman for Future Generations. And it is really notable for the elaboration of the public trust doctrine, which is an important concept, internationally accepted concept of environmental protection, that actually means that the state acts as a trustee over the natural values for the benefit of future generations. So, in conclusion, we can sum up that the Hungarian Ombudsman for Future Generations have a really significant impact on shaping the Constitutional Court practice, as we could see it from the number of examples. And turning to the second highlighted point, among his competencies, I decided to talk about the legislative proposals, namely 2 of them. The first one is from 2019. It is the legislative proposal on the effective enforcement of environmental liability, which is strongly connected to the Environmental Liability Directive of the European Union. And it's a really comprehensive proposal. I just highlighted arbitrarily a few of these proposals, namely the financial guarantees for environmental liability, or the creation of separate budgetary funds for historical damages and damages to be occurred in the future. And actually, as far as I know, there are the results are not tangible yet, so the Parliament did not adopt the legislative proposal in this form. But given that there are really high-profile contributors to this proposal, ministries and the Prosecutor General, I think that something may happen, that there might be high hopes for the success of this proposal. And secondly, there was another proposal from 2020, the legislative proposal on the protection of groundwater resources, which is not as complex as the previous one in the sense that it aimed to react on a specific modification of an act relating to water management. And it relied also on that decision which I have mentioned earlier from 2018, which also pronounced that groundwater resources form part of the common heritage of the nation under Article P of the Fundamental Law. And in this sense, it shall enjoy a higher level of protection, and the principles of prevention and precaution, which are at the constitutional level, as well as intergeneration equity, shall be implemented in the decision making. And actually, as far as I know, this proposal wasn't adopted in this form, but the original draft was modified, so it wasn't the original draft wasn't adopted, and let's say that from an environmental perspective, a better better law was adopted, so it could be regarded as successful. And as for the other activities and the international activities of the Ombudsman for future generations, I would like to highlight the establishment of the network of the institutions of future generations that was established by the former Green Ombudsman, and it encompasses the institutions that I have mentioned in the beginning, which were mentioned in the UN Secretary General's report, that 8 institutions. And it also shows the important role of the Hungarian Ombudsman among these 8 institutions, that he was the one to establish this network. And secondly, the voluntary national review of Hungary on the Sustainable Development Goals could also be mentioned, which was published as an annex to the document of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development in 2018. And it elaborates on the implementation of certain sustainable development goals in Hungary and some proposals and analysis of how they should be implemented. Apart from this, the Ombudsman issues opinions, recommendations, and several reports on various topics related to the interest of future generations. I, again, arbitrarily selected a few of these topics, such as the national parks or protected species, the protection of soil, groundwater resources, and water management. And to sum up, I would like to highlight that the Hungarian model has an outstanding role not only in shaping environmental protection in Hungary, as we could see it from the influence on the Constitutional Court practice and the legislative proposals, but also at the international levels through, for example, the network of future generations institutions, and taking into account that there are difficulties with the implementation and the enforcement of the rights of future generations at the institutional level. In my opinion, the creation of similar institutions at the national level could certainly be a good first step towards the better representation of the interests of future generations. And I didn't really elaborate on the comparison between the work of the former Green Ombudsman and the present Ombudsman system. But what I concluded in my article is that also from the conclusions of the abolition of the Israeli Commissioner, is that a really delicate balance shall be struck between the competencies of future generations advocates, I'm saying it in general, and political bodies when determining the scope of their influence, even in the establishment of future institutions in different countries. And despite the concerns that I have mentioned in the beginning, the non-existence problem and the standing before the courts, which certainly at a certain level hinders the effective enforcement of future generations, in my opinion, the endeavors shall not be hindered by this in order to implement the future generations perspective, not only in the legislation but also in the courts practice. And that was all. I would like to thank everyone for your kind attention.